Years ago, I had no clue that my life would take such a drastic turn. Back then, I was an ambitious lawyer, focused on winning every case. My clients were often unsavory characters, some even dangerous, whose names were whispered in circles I wasn't always proud to be associated with. But I thrived in the chaos, quickly realizing that law wasn't just about justice. It was a game of strategy. My ability to navigate this shady terrain earned me both wealth and notoriety. The deeper I went, the more entangled I became, forming alliances with those who could shift things in my favor. As time passed, my moral compass shifted, leading me to make decisions that left me indebted to men like Sergeant Devin Cross. Despite his upstanding nature, our paths crossed during the worst time in his life. That encounter would later come back to haunt him, linking us in an unspoken contract. He owed me after I saved his family's home from foreclosure, and it wasn't long before I called in that favor. What neither of us could anticipate was how this debt would bring unwanted attention to both of us. Falcon's Nest, a bar and grill along the aging Route 7, sits at the intersection of 3 counties, just outside town. Known as a hangout for local law enforcement, it might not seem like an ideal spot for a discreet meeting, which is why it was perfect for me. I pulled into the parking lot, already crowded, and headed inside. For a cop bar, Falcon's Nest was surprisingly upscale, with a spacious bar and plenty of seating. It was the last Friday of the month, busy but not overwhelming, ideal for a conversation with Sergeant Cross. The crowd made the meeting appear casual, not suspicious. When I walked in, most of the patrons greeted me with hostile stares. I expected it, given that I was suspected of liquidating my unfaithful wife and her lover, a police detective. Of course, there was no charge, no bodies, no evidence. The couple and their car had vanished without a trace. Still, in their eyes, I was guilty. I had motive, and as a lowly lawyer, I needed proof. When Devin arrived, he didn't look thrilled with my choice of venue. He was tall, well-built, and could only be described as honorable. He was there to repay a debt and cleanse himself of the guilt of owing a man like me. Now let me be frank. I'm what you'd call crooked, a lawyer without any moral standing. I've been an unindicted co-conspirator in at least half a dozen organized crime cases. Poor Devin was in a bad place the day he walked into my office with a thick stack of foreclosure papers. At the time, he was a Metropolitan Police officer, a sufferer of carnivory mortgage fraud. It was early 2008, and he, his wife, and their 4 children were about to lose their home. He had already approached every honest and semi-honest lawyer, but had found no real help. He came to me out of sheer desperation. Frankly, I'm not sure why I helped him. He was a good, honest cop, loyal to his friends, but he wasn't someone I could use, and he couldn't pay. He admitted that right away. Online scammers had taken his last dime. The foreclosure was scheduled for the next day. He just sat in my office, this large, physically strong man with tears in his eyes, telling me about his daughter, his little princess, who had cancer. He didn't know how to tell her and her brothers that they were about to lose their home. I filed for bankruptcy to stop the sale. Then, I had some of my shadier clients visit a mortgage broker and get a confession that the foreclosure documents were forged. In other words, a mortgage fraudster, backed by 2 of the more violent criminals, had, for once, told the truth. It only took a bigger bribe to the court than Deutsche Bank was willing to pay to finally get some justice. Why did I do all this? I still don't know. But it was tough for Devin Cross to accept that his family home had been saved by a crook like me. "You chose a strange place to meet," he said. "Even someone like me has a conscience. I didn't want you to feel obligated by helping me." "So you picked this place?" he asked as Lottie, the barmaid, approached. "What can I get you, Bruce?" she asked. She and I had a long history of harmless flirting and me giving her way too much advice. She had a young son and no man at home, having made the mistake of choosing looks over reliability. There was tension in Lottie's expression. Everyone believed I was guilty, so I must be, which meant that anyone seen with me would suffer. And yet, I noticed Lottie came to the table when she could have easily passed my service to someone else. Lottie was a good friend. As it turned out, I had more people like her than I realized. I didn't want them to suffer for staying loyal to me. I needed to fix my life and show people they could feel comfortable around me again. Devin Cross stood in my way, offering me a lifeline, but I had to make the most of it. "Get us 2 Boston beers, Lottie," I said. "I have to say, counselor, you've got guts, coming in here where Paul Moreno's friends and colleagues hang out," Devin said. Paul Moreno was the guy who seduced my wife and dragged me into all this trouble. He, his Ford GT, and my wife vanished on the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, after back-to-back thunderstorms flooded 3 counties around Schoharie Creek. In any of the western states, it would have been called a river, but here it's misleadingly called a creek, a name that's caused plenty of suffering. People have tried for years to build bridges and structures around it, only to pay with lives and property for underestimating the Schoharie. By the morning of March 18th, all the emergency crews were focused on rescuing flood sufferers. No one realized my wife and her lover were missing for a few days. Then, of course, all suspicion fell on me. Fortune favors the bold, as they say, I told Devin. We made small talk for a while as he got down to business. After 2 beers, I finally said, "Just tell me what you came to say, and I'll handle the rest. Don't worry, no one will ever know the advice came from you." He leaned in and whispered, "They've got a warrant, and they're coming to your house and office at 6 a.m. on Sunday." I pushed my chair back, stood up, and let it crash to the floor. Then I shouted, "Look, when I need advice, I'm not going to get it from some subway pig, and that guy will be a better friend than you. And for the last time, I don't know what happened to my wife." I stormed out, leaving a bewildered Devin behind. But he was sharp and would realize that everyone would assume the worst. They'd think he was an ambitious cop trying to get ahead. Pushing for a confession from me wouldn't hurt his career, but being seen in a secret meeting with me would destroy him. As it stood, the encounter was public enough that no one would believe he had tipped me off. Walking out of Falcon's Rest, I sighed. I had only myself to blame for how things had spiraled out of control. I'd let my emotions cloud my judgment. Now I'd have to work hard to get out from under the oppressive weight of justice in this country. Yet my late wife's words about milk haunted me, like a swarm of bees, stinging my heart until all the life drained from it.
October 1st. I saw him again today. He's very tall and handsome, with wavy black hair. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she slept with him. He's a cop, which means he's probably following me because of Bruce. It's hard to imagine someone as ordinary as Bruce making people so suspicious, but it's likely due to his being a lawyer for high-profile criminals. The people he deals with are much more intriguing than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong, I love him dearly. He's like a teddy bear, the kind of person you feel safe with. I'll never understand why people think he's dangerous. Jenny says, "The cop chasing me is a real stud. He's loaded. His name's Paul Moreno. She's been seeing him for the last 6 months. Her husband Bob is like a carbon copy of my Bruce, except he's got a dull real estate practice instead of handling criminal defense." You can't blame Jenny for falling for a cop's charm. Temptation like that is hard to resist. After 7 years of marriage and 2 kids, she's craving excitement. Or so she says. As for me, after 15 years of marriage and a 14-year-old daughter, I'm ready for a rocking chair on the back porch. Women like me just don't catch the attention of young studs anymore. It makes me feel ancient. October 15th. Bruce is out of town again. Lately, it feels like he's traveling more and more. If it were anyone else, I'd suspect infidelity. But Bruce is loyal, like a spaniel. He joined a gym today thanks to Jenny. She's into fitness and wanted a workout partner. I'm not in bad shape, not like Bruce, who's dealing with middle age, but I figured I could use some toning. I've upped my morning jog from 1 mile to 2. Still, I need to work on my stomach and bum. I've been feeling anxious about the idea of my daughter leaving home. Maybe getting in shape will help. Why did I let my 14-year-old talk me into sending her to boarding school? Rachel's so much like my mother, full of ambition, with little concern for others. Mom still mocks my choice of career, but I believe helping others is the highest calling. Being a social worker can be frustrating, but on those rare days when you help someone change their life, it's incredibly rewarding. Rachel might be trying to escape the stigma of Bruce's profession. People say such cruel things, and a teenage girl can be very sensitive. Maybe it's better for her to leave, but I'll still miss her. I saw him again today. God, he's so handsome. He was at my gym looking like a total stud in a tight suit. You could see the definition of his abs, but I tried not to stare at the bulge in his shorts. Why he's still following me, I don't know, but Paul Moreno is definitely catching my attention. October 17th. I saw Paul Moreno at the gym again today. He caught my eye and held my gaze until I had to look away. Jenny thinks he's interested in me, but I can't imagine why. Unless it's because of Bruce. I've been thinking about Paul a lot lately. It's just a harmless fantasy, right? Nothing wrong with that. November 2nd, I voted today, though it probably doesn't matter. As I was leaving the polling station, I saw Paul again. He wasn't even trying to hide. He hadn't been following me for a while, but over the past few days, he's reappeared. He actually said hello this time, so I stopped to talk. "Are you following me again?" I asked, turning to face him. "Well, that's my job. And my excuse," he replied with a smirk. "But what if I was just following you for other reasons?" "Why would you do that?" I questioned, narrowing my eyes. He grinned. "Have you looked in a mirror lately?" I sighed and waved him off. "Stop! I'm the mother of a teenager." "Ever heard the term MILF?" he asked, his tone playful. "No, what's that?" I responded, confused. He leaned in slightly. "It's a term for a hot mom who catches the eye of younger guys." "Stop it! I'm an old lady," I said, shaking my head. He chuckled softly. "Yes, you are an older woman, but not old, just mature." At that moment, I saw someone I knew and ended the conversation. I couldn't believe he was flirting with me like that. Sure, I've lost 5 pounds since joining the gym, but still, a young guy interested in me? It's flattering. I used to feel intimidated by all the younger women with their fit bodies, but getting a personal trainer and sticking to it is clearly paying off. Bruce has noticed too. He just sent me 2 dozen roses. When I called to ask why, he said he wanted to send flowers to his beautiful wife. What can I say about a man like that? I love him deeply. I might flirt with a handsome young man, but I'll never betray my devoted husband.
"Jake," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. "Jesus, do you know what time it is, counselor?" he groaned, sounding half asleep. "I've been calling you since about 9, I replied, frustration creeping into my voice. "I've been at work," Jake Trumbull explained. "Well, I've got a new job for you," I said, getting straight to the point. "Can it wait?" Jake asked, clearly not thrilled. "No, it's urgent," I pressed. "And what is it?" he asked, now sounding more awake. "I need a complete black binder at my residence and office by Sunday. Dawn." "This Sunday?" Jake questioned, surprised. "Yes, this Sunday," I confirmed. "It takes 72 hours and you're giving me 24 at best," Jake pointed out. "I'm sorry, I just got a message that I need it," I explained. "Well, it's going to cost you a lot," Jake warned. "How much?" I asked, bracing myself. 35, Jake said. "After all the business I've sent your way, that's my special price. For anyone else, it would be 50. Jake made no mention of the fact that it was unlikely I'd live to send him any more cases. Moreover, at this point, whether I was a business partner or not, I was in no position to bargain. He could charge me any price he wanted and I would have to pay it. "Fine, but do it," I said.
November 9th. I've seen Paul 3 times this week. Now he always smiles and waves. Jenny is fully involved with him and says he's the best lover she's ever had. He's 29, 8 years younger than me. Jenny claims that being with him makes her feel like it's her first time. Today, while I was at Starbucks sipping my mocha latte, Paul came over and sat at my table. He didn't say anything for a long time, just looked at me and I kept ignoring him. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've been reassigned," he said, breaking the silence. "What?" I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. "I'm no longer officially following you," he explained. "And what does that mean?" I asked, still trying to understand. "Well, for starters, it means my superiors don't believe you're involved in any crimes your husband may have committed," he said calmly. Then, unexpectedly, he reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "But it also means I can finally tell you how much I like you. I'd like us to get to know each other better." I pulled my hand back slightly. "You know I'm married. What do you mean by get to know me better?" He gently took my other hand between his. "It means you're a beautiful woman married to a man who can't fulfill you. You deserve to experience real love between a man and a woman." "What about Jenny? I've heard you two were involved," I asked, trying to steer the conversation away. "What Jenny and I had was just casual. She's unhappy in her marriage, but I'm looking for something deeper," he said, dismissing the topic. "Besides, you don't really think any man would choose her over you," he added with a smile. I met his gaze, my voice firm. "As I said, I'm married. I've never cheated on my husband." He leaned in slightly. "Can he say the same? You've seen him. What do you think?" "I think we both know you deserve more," he said softly. At that, I stood up, leaving most of my latte untouched. I had to get out of there. This man was affecting me more than I cared to admit, and it made me uncomfortable. December 1st. Since our encounter at the coffee shop, I hadn't seen Paul, and I felt both relieved and disappointed. I regretted not seeing him. His attention did wonders for my ego, and I couldn't deny my physical attraction to him. After all, I had never been with anyone but my husband. I was curious about what it would be like with another man, especially someone so wealthy and skilled. After work, I was walking to my car in the DSS parking lot. It was a little late because I had been delayed by paperwork. The lot was well lit but empty. As I approached my car, I had the distinct feeling that someone was watching me. I bent down to open the door, and suddenly Paul was right next to me. I jumped, startled. "Paul, you nearly scared me to end. Are you stalking me now?" "I'm sorry," he said, slipping his hand around my waist under my open coat. "I just needed to see you. I can't stop thinking about you." I probably should have been scared, but in truth, he had been on my mind constantly. I wanted to see him too. "Please," I begged. "Leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband." Instead of responding, he leaned in and kissed me. There was an electric force between us. "I need you," he said, "more than I've ever needed any woman. If it were just about me, I'd leave you alone, but I can feel your body calling to me." I couldn't stop myself from kissing him back, but then I pulled away, jumped into my car, and shut the door. I wish I could, but I can't.
They didn't bother knocking. 4 officers in tactical gear picked the lock and barged into my house early Sunday morning. I suppose they thought they'd catch me off guard, asleep. Instead, I was already up, in the kitchen, making what the tourist brochures call a full English breakfast. Sure, I swapped out the kippers for locks, but I found a specialty shop that sold kidney pie. I was frying scrambled eggs in a large pan when the first officer stormed into the kitchen. "I hope you like scrambled eggs," I said as he grabbed me and shoved me outside. They threw me into a police van while they ransacked my house. They tore up carpet and dug through my flower beds. Thankfully, most of my floors were wood, so they only damaged a few boards and left the upper floors relatively untouched. The basement, though, they completely wrecked. What bothered me most was when they went after the trunk of my car. It felt unnecessary since I'd left the keys in the ignition, but it seemed destruction was their main goal. Still, they weren't entirely heartless. After they finished tearing apart my house, a few officers I'd gotten to know over the years invited me to Denny's for lunch. "So where'd you hide the bodies, Bruce?" they asked, while I ate what they called the big breakfast, which was a letdown compared to the meal I'd planned. "As far as I know, there aren't any bodies. Come on. They disappeared in March. It's October now. Do you think it'll rain today? It's been pretty dry since those spring and summer storms. My flower beds are ruined, so I'll have to replant bulbs if I want flowers next spring. But at least I'm better off than the folks near Schoharie Creek," I said, referring to the flooding in the area. The officers at Denny's weren't interested in the flood or my flowers. They only cared about one thing, getting a confession. They were desperate because they had next to no evidence. The problem was, I knew how quickly things could change, just like a creek spilling over. "You might not see those spring flowers, but you'll feel better if you help us out. We know you had your reasons. Maybe you just lost control. Stop being a lawyer for once and own up to it. We'll work with you." "I don't think it'll rain. Looks like we're in for a drought after all that wet weather. I'll stop by Lowe's later for some light bulbs." "Okay, have it your way, lawyer, but cop butchers get the end penalty in this state. You might want to think long and hard about that."
December 9th. I had one hell of a day. We got an early call, 5 kids in need of protection. Normally I don't work with Child Protective Services, but it's the busy season. With a bad flu outbreak and people taking time off for the holidays, we were short-staffed and had to be flexible. Still, placing 5 children under 7 in emergency care was no easy task. By 4 a.m., we had placed the children and set up support for the new foster parents. I was feeling pretty good about it until the state foster care department called, unhappy with the placement. It was the same bureaucratic nonsense as always. They were concerned about child care payments going to state retirees. "This could be considered double dipping," one of the state workers said. "We spent an hour going back and forth on the issue. It escalated all the way to the county executive and the state DSS commissioner. Just when I thought the case was falling apart, I heard from the foster parents. "When are the kids coming?" the woman asked. "We're ready. My 2 daughters are here to help." "Well, the state's concerned about making payments since you receive a state pension," I explained. Her response was filled with real anger. Well, tell that idiot governor to keep his lousy payments. Just send the kids. The county executive laughed when he heard this and said, "Send the kids. We can sue the state for the money later if needed." It took another 3 hours to get the children to their new home and settled in. By the time I headed home, it was nearly 8 o'clock, and I didn't get in until 9 o'clock. The first thing I did was take a hot shower. I thought about calling Bruce. Sometimes when I call, we can talk for hours, but other times he seems busy, like his clients take up all his time. Usually I wait for him to call me, but today, I just needed to talk to someone about my day. I wrapped myself in my terry cloth robe and was about to call when the doorbell rang. Tightening the robe, I answered with the chain on. Paul stood at the door, looking both handsome and a little guilty. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I don't think that's a good idea," I replied. "I know your husband's out of town. You're all alone. I just want to come in for a little while, maybe have a cup of coffee and talk." "I can't, Paul," I said. "You can trust me." He smiled gently. "It's not you I don't trust, it's me. Please, just for a few minutes." For some reason, I let him in. I made us some coffee and we sat on opposite ends of the large sectional couch. As I sat down, I adjusted my robe, which felt too short for the situation. "Relax," he said, noticing my discomfort. "I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm just a friend. I heard you had a rough day." "Yeah," I replied. And as we talked about my day, I started to feel more at ease. I convinced myself that there was nothing wrong with two people having a drink. We switched from coffee to wine and ate frozen pizza for dinner. It was nearly midnight when Paul finally said what he had come to say. "Elaine, I'll always be your friend, but I have feelings for you, deep feelings. What I'm feeling for you is love." His words made me tense. "Please," he continued, "let me finish. Your husband is in New York right now, meeting with organized crime members and their anti-surveillance expert. They're plotting how to beat the government's wiretapping. These are dangerous people and he's helping them." "Stop! I don't want to hear this. Bruce isn't here to defend himself and it's not fair." "You're loyal, I see that. But is it fair to you to be tied to a man like that? When I followed you and fell in love, I saw what a kind, caring woman you are. You help people. You're a saint who married the devil. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." Over the course of the evening, we had gradually moved closer on the couch. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. We both knew where things were headed, like a runaway train that couldn't be stopped. Then I heard the phone ringing. It had probably been ringing for a while, and suddenly it was clear who was calling. "Bruce," I said, breaking away from Paul's grip. It was Bruce. "Just checking in," he said. "Sorry, did I wake you? I lost track of time." I braced myself and tried to have a normal conversation. Bruce was chatty, going on, while I watched Paul grow more impatient. Finally, he gave me a sad smile and quietly left. Bruce's call had saved me from crossing a line I could never uncross. But did I really want to be saved?
The DA's conference room had a worn-out look, as if it hadn't been updated in the last 20 years. Tanya Marshall, the daughter of a former state senator who had dodged prosecution and secured her a job in the DA's office, now served as the DA herself. She wasn't better or worse than the others, just another person in power who oppressed the poor while complaining about the rich affording lawyers. "Where's your tool, Mr. Gray?" she asked. "We didn't find it when we searched your house." "A tool?" I said. "A Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum, registered to you. It's missing." "It is? This is the first I've heard of it. It was in the top drawer of my nightstand. Is it really gone?" "This would be easier if we were honest with each other," she said. "Sure, go ahead and start. What evidence did your officers supposedly find in my house?" "All in good time," she replied. "Well then, I'll answer your questions on my own time," I said, standing up. With that, she handed me a notice of my right to appear before the grand jury. That was the real point of the meeting. I had no intention of going. The outcome was clear. I was going to be indicted for 2 liquidations. The DA had no choice. They'd broken into my wife's desk and taken her diary. They knew all about her affair. Of course, to someone like Tanya, it read like a tragic love story. My perspective was different. It was a shame about the desk. It was a small, colonial-era antique that had sat in a dealer's display case for nearly a year. We had just gotten married, and our daughter Rachel was learning to walk. Elaine was working on her master's degree in social work, and I was a struggling new lawyer. I loved her and knew how much she wanted that desk. Every time we walked by the store, she'd stop and gaze at it. I saved every penny I could, but when I finally went to buy it for our anniversary, it was gone from the window. I went inside and asked for it, and the manager said it had been moved to the back. When it was delivered to our little apartment, Elaine was overjoyed. Over the years, I watched her sit at that desk, thinking how lucky I was to have her. Love is made up of those little moments, her excitement over that antique desk, our daughter's first steps, buying our first house, Elaine's pride when she earned her master's degree. All those moments combined, they form what people call love. When they opened the desk and found the journal, I suppose I could have left the drawers unlocked. But then they might not have noticed the diary. Locking them made it stand out, and I needed them to find it. Still, the destruction of the desk stung. Maybe it made me realize that Elaine was really gone. The diary had the effect I expected. Its contents leaked quickly, and the pressure on the DA's office ramped up. They had what they saw as proof, and the public knew about the affair. My unfaithful wife and her lover had become a modern-day Romeo and Juliet.
January 2nd. I can't do this, can I? Jenny just laughs at my hesitation. What's wrong with you two? Your husbands are out of town. You go to his apartment and no one will ever know. It's that simple. How am I ever going to face Bruce again? I asked, feeling the heavy weight of guilt. I don't care what people say about him. He's always treated me well. What am I supposed to say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone all the time, Jenny suggested, casually brushing aside my worries. He doesn't really leave that often, I muttered, trying to defend Bruce despite my internal struggle. And when we're together, we have a good marriage. It's just that Paul makes me feel things I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just do what I did with Bob, Jenny said, her voice indifferent. What did you do? Remember the day we arrived here and Bob looked so upset? Yeah, I remember. At one point, he asked to lie down in the bedroom. He looked almost sick. Well, he found out I had slept with Paul, and I told him everything. I told him I still loved him, but that there was nothing he could do about it. I said a man like Paul knows how to treat women. Bob probably wanted to eliminate him, but physically, he couldn't take on Paul. You're lucky Bob doesn't own a tool, I said, knowing Bruce wasn't the type to react that way. Honestly, I added, thinking it over, I don't think Bruce would handle it like Bob did. I have a feeling he'd do something about it. But Jenny insisted I was wrong. We talked about how much Bruce loves me, and she said he'd handle it just like Bob. But deep down, I knew Bruce was different. I'd seen Paul about 6 times in the last 3 weeks. We were never truly alone, but I noticed him watching me. Maybe he was watching Bruce too. Today, Bruce was home and being very attentive. Paul slipped me a note. It had an address, a date, and a time. I'm pretty sure it's the address of his apartment, and the time is when Bruce will be in New York. I don't want to go, but I know I will. I keep telling myself I'm only going to ask Paul to leave me alone. January 15th. God, what have I done? I spent the day at Paul's apartment. It started off fine. I told him we couldn't be alone together, that I couldn't betray my husband. But things spiraled out of control, and we ended up in bed. I left in tears, swearing it wouldn't happen again, but neither of us believed it was really over. As I walked out of his apartment, I knew I would definitely be back.
Tanya's presentation before the grand jury was far better than her usual, which meant it was good, likely the product of a ghostwriter. Her boss, District Attorney Silva Marks, sat beside her. Marks wasn't about to let a subordinate steal all the glory, but wasn't foolish enough to handle the case herself. I represented myself. Presiding Judge Bascom warned me that a lawyer representing himself has a fool for a client. I replied that it's better than having a fool for a lawyer. Bascom would do whatever he could to ensure justice was served, meaning I'd be convicted. He'd bend over backward to support a weak prosecution and twist the concept of reasonable doubt into something closer to guilty until proven innocent in his instructions to the jury. My only concern was that someone might notice I had an ace up my sleeve, waiting for the right moment to play it. I had the truth on my side, while they had the tragic romance of Romeo and Juliet. The lovers were a police officer and my wife, a social worker. I was cast as the villain. Whether I was innocent or guilty didn't matter. Life isn't fair, and justice rarely finds its way into the courtroom. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car? Tanya asked her first witness. Yes, the car immediately raised my suspicions. It was an old brown Toyota Camry, not what you'd expect from a high-priced lawyer. It's very unremarkable with a large trunk, McVeigh said, setting the scene for the jury. I see, Tanya said, flashing a smile at the jury, subtly suggesting I was being sly. What, if anything, did you find in the trunk? It looked recently cleaned, but we found hair and fibers matching Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray, McVeigh answered. So, it's possible their bodies were in the trunk? Tanya asked, giving a knowing look to the jury. Objection. That calls for speculation, I interrupted. Judge Bascom, predictably siding with the prosecution, overruled. The witness is an expert. He's being asked for his opinion. Tanya nodded and turned back to the witness. So, Sergeant? She prompted. McVeigh, emboldened by the ruling, confidently continued. In my expert opinion, the Camry was used to transport and dispose of your wife and her lover's bodies. When it was my turn for cross-examination, I asked, Sergeant, if the bodies were transported in the Camry, what happened to the bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GT? McVeigh looked confused. I'm not sure what you mean. Paul Moreno's car, his prized Mustang. It's still missing, isn't it? I clarified. I don't know about that, McVeigh mumbled, clearly caught off guard. But you do know his car is gone, and that car is anything but unremarkable, isn't it? I directed the question more to the jury than to McVeigh. After a pause, McVeigh reluctantly admitted, Yes, Paul's car is missing. Now back to the Camry, I continued. You broke into the trunk, but why didn't you use the keys that were already in the ignition? McVeigh looked momentarily stunned, but before he could respond, Tanya objected. The question is argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. The judge, unsurprisingly, sustained the objection. There was no point in pressing further. McVeigh could only look sheepish as he retreated. Next, the prosecution called investigator Kim Eng to the stand. Eng eagerly informed the jury about pulling up the carpet in my basement and discovering traces of blood. Were you able to identify this blood by type or DNA? Tanya asked, her tone heavy, as if building up to something damning. No, it was too decomposed, Eng replied. But there was a strong smell of bleach in the basement, which is why I suspected we'd find blood. Bleach is often used to clean up blood stains. When it was my turn to question Eng, I kept it brief. The basement was the laundry room, wasn't it? I asked. Yes, Eng confirmed. You expected to find bleach in a laundry room, didn't you? I pressed. I can't say. It depends on the person doing the laundry, Eng answered evasively. The 7 women on the jury didn't seem to agree with Eng's attempt to dodge the question. But then came the real drama, the reading of my wife's diary.
January 16th. I feel both guilty and like I'm floating on air. I can't stop thinking about Paul, his incredible body and how he made me feel. But the guilt over Bruce is eating at me. For the first time, I want to believe all the terrible things people say about him, but I know they're not true. Bruce has always been so loving, and I've repaid him with the ultimate betrayal. I feel like my guilt is written all over me, as if Bruce will look at me and instantly know what I've done to him, to us. The desk I'm writing at was a gift from Bruce, bought at a time when we didn't have much money. It's a real antique. I used to stop and admire it in the store window, even though I knew we couldn't afford it. Despite our struggles, I stopped using birth control, a decision I made on my own. Bruce never criticized me for it. He was thrilled when I got pregnant. Even when we were struggling financially, he somehow found a way to buy me this extravagant gift. My loving husband of 15 years whom I've betrayed so easily. I keep going back and forth. Should I never see Paul again? Or should I run straight into his arms? When Bruce gets back from his trip tonight, maybe he'll sense what's happened and that will end it one way or another. I don't know what I'll say to him. I don't want to hurt him. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce suspects anything, he didn't show it. Still, our interaction felt off, like there was a distance between us. Maybe I'm imagining it because of my guilt. Bruce seemed tired, so I'll just have to wait and see. I left for work early this morning, barely able to look him in the eye. I had barely made it to work when Paul called. We chatted until I had to get back to my job, and somehow, talking to him lifted my spirits. It gave me hope that everything would work out. I have to admit, what I feel for Paul is love. Maybe not the same love I have for Bruce, but it's something I've never experienced before. January 19th. I took a long lunch today. Not really for lunch, but to meet Paul at his apartment. He works the 4 to midnight shift, so we had a couple of hours together. When I got home, Bruce seemed calm, but I can't shake the feeling that something's different between us. There's a distance I can't quite figure out. February 12th. This past month has been chaos. My affair with Paul has intensified. We see each other at least twice a week during the day, and when Bruce is out of town, which has been happening more often, we meet in the evenings. Paul told me that Bruce is involved with some very dangerous people. The FBI is concerned because Bruce is helping them with anti-surveillance technology, blocking their warrants. The equipment is illegal, but can be purchased with special permits. Paul didn't say it outright, but I know he's still monitoring Bruce. I should be thankful Paul always knows where Bruce is, but the tension between Paul and me is growing. I'm torn between 2 men I love and their enemies. I'm trapped in a no-win situation. Bruce has been such a good husband, showering me with gifts, sending flowers, and being so loving. But I can't shake the feeling he knows what's going on. He hasn't shown any signs, but after 15 years, I can tell something is bothering him. March 16th. Rachel is home for spring break. I haven't seen her since Christmas, and she seems happy. But I suspect she wanted to go to boarding school to escape the rumors about Bruce. She loves him, but she can't avoid the whispers. It must be hard for her to deal with what people say about her father. With Rachel home, Paul and I can't meet at the house, and Paul mentioned that people at work are getting suspicious about us. It would ruin his career if anyone found out. Paul plans to ask for a transfer. He wants me to leave Bruce, but when it comes down to it, I know what Paul is asking of me is wrong. What I've been doing with him is wrong on so many levels. Seeing Rachel reminds me that I'm first and foremost her mother and Bruce's wife. They don't deserve the pain I would cause by leaving with Paul. The hurt I would inflict on my family far outweighs the pain I'll feel losing Paul. I think I'm finally coming to my senses. This passion for Paul has clouded my judgment. I need to do the right thing. When I see Paul tomorrow, I'll end it. It will hurt him, but he'll survive. Jenny is waiting for him, I know that. She's young and beautiful, and her husband can't stop her infatuation with Paul. A man like Bob doesn't stand a chance against someone like Paul. People say Bruce isn't like other men. Would Bruce hurt Paul if he found out? I don't think Bruce would ever hurt me, but maybe I'm wrong. The rumors, the horrible things people say about him, they can't all be true, can they? I've known and loved Bruce all these years, yet I still have doubts. Paul keeps insisting Bruce is dangerous and that I'm at risk, but I just can't believe Bruce could hurt anyone. March 17th. Tomorrow I'm going to break up with Paul. It will hurt, but it's the right thing to do. I called Jenny and told her she might need to comfort Paul after tomorrow.
The young paralegal Tanya had selected finished reading the final entry in my wife's diary. The prosecution had aimed to paint me as a jealous, abusive husband who came between 2 lovers. But Elaine's diary didn't quite support that story. After all, she had chosen to stay in our home instead of running off with the man who tried to steal her. Paul Moreno was a homewrecker, a man who knew my wife was happily married but pursued her anyway. Maybe he believed the rumors law enforcement spread about me, or maybe he thought he was rescuing the woman he loved. But in the end, the 2 lovers waited too long and met a tragic end. In a case like this, there are so many what-ifs. What if Elaine had confessed to me earlier, or what if they had ended the affair sooner? Who knows how things might have played out, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was saving my life. After hearing Elaine's diary, the jury was already leaning toward conviction, and everyone in the courtroom could sense it. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one truly mattered. Jake Trumbull took the stand. On paper, he seemed like an ordinary witness. His expert report was 500 pages of technical details, with mention of a video buried on page 439. We started with his credentials: a degree in electrical engineering from RIT, Service and Army Intelligence, and 20 years in the FBI. Not bad. What I hadn't fully considered was that, after leaving the FBI, Jake had been hired by the same criminal organizations he once pursued for the government. He had become invaluable to me and others in battling government surveillance. "Mr. Trumbull, have you done any work for me in the past?" I asked. "Yes, several times," he replied. "And the last time you worked for me, what exactly did you do?" I inquired. "I installed a full video surveillance system covering both your home and office inside and out. We call it Black Cover, designed to catch dirty deeds," Trumbull explained. "And what do you mean by dirty deeds?" I pressed. The usual unauthorized entry to plant listening devices or evidence, he clarified. And did you discover any such deeds? I asked, leaning in slightly. Yes. My team and I observed Sergeant McVeigh take the keys to a brown Camry, open the trunk, and dump materials from a bag inside. Later, he returned with other officers and broke open the trunk with a crowbar. They then collected what they called trace samples from the trunk. The courtroom buzzed with shock. Trumbull was in his element and submitted the video as evidence. Despite the prosecution's objections, Trumbull went on to explain how investigator Eng had planted blood in the basement. Without forensic evidence, the prosecution's case crumbled. They had no proof of a crime, just a missing couple, a missing tool, and an ordinary car. When the not guilty verdict was read, my daughter Rachel hugged me. She never believed I had eliminated her mother, and that's all that really mattered to me. Still, many people believed I'd gotten away with liquidation. Surprisingly, no action was taken against the officers who tried to frame me. In a way, they saved my life by presenting the prosecution with a case too weak to convict. The long, dry summer revealed a blue Ford Mustang in the now exposed mud of Schoharie Creek. Inside the car, they found the bodies, crammed into the frame. It turned out the floodwaters had carried the car away and then let it sink deep into the rushing creek. Elaine's purse with the GPS tracker I had planted was found along with her remains. Elaine had been right to be suspicious. I was collecting evidence of her affair. I loved her, but she had hurt me deeply. In my mind, Paul Moreno was the snake who had tried to destroy a good marriage. It broke my heart, but I was planning a divorce, not a liquidation. Still, the police wouldn't have believed that. My wife and her lover were dead, and even if I were a saint, they would have found me guilty. But I was no saint. Elaine's body lay beneath Paul's in the car. The autopsy revealed that they had both been shot, but the bullets were meant for Paul. They passed through him and into her. The double homicide was the result of a powerful weapon, a .44 caliber Smith & Wesson hand tool, the same one that had disappeared from my nightstand. If the police had just been patient, they wouldn't have needed to plant evidence. The lover's story and the leaked diary had pushed them to act too soon. I had been set up, but skill and luck saved me. As an attorney, I took pride in my work. Law enforcement lamented that the system had been outwitted by a cunning lawyer, but in the end, I survived. Lottie set her beer aside, giving me a warm smile, then placed her hand on my shoulder in a show of support. We were at Chambers, the bar frequented by lawyers in town. Lottie had moved on to a new job, and I followed her here out of loyalty. Chambers was a much better spot for me to drink than Falcon's Rest, where the cops would never forgive me for beating them in court. Here, the regulars had a certain sympathy for a disgraced lawyer, a poor attorney with a ruined reputation. But that opinion wasn't entirely accurate. The clients I needed saw my acquittal on charges where I was clearly guilty as proof of my skills. The negative publicity had only made me raise my hourly rate and hire a young associate to help with the growing demand. Far from being tainted, I was becoming something of an anti-hero. Tanya, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. She was forced out of the DA's office, made the scapegoat for the prosecution's failure. It didn't matter that she built her case on fabricated evidence. The public needed someone to blame, and she was the easiest target. Meanwhile, my career thrived. I had weathered the worst storm of my life, and ironically, it made me more successful than ever. I had a reputation now as a lawyer who could get the guilty off, deserved or not. At Chambers, I sipped my beer and leaned back, feeling the weight of recent events finally lift. My drinking buddy, Bob, another attorney, gulped down half his beer in one go. "Relax, Bob, no need to rush," I said. "I don't have a wife waiting for me at home, and yours isn't worth hurrying back to," I added with a smirk. Bob frowned, as he usually did when I mentioned his wife, Jenny. I think he finally realized that some women, no matter how beautiful, weren't worth the trouble. Jenny definitely fell into that category. "I'm sorry," Bob began, but couldn't quite finish. "Please," I waved him off. "I didn't ask for an apology. You must realize that given the situation, none is expected. But I never meant to offend Elaine," he added, pleading. "Of course you didn't. It was an accident, Bob. A man like you isn't familiar with tools. You couldn't have known the bullets would go through Officer Moreno and strike the woman with him. And I object to calling what they were doing being with each other. They were screwing." Bob winced, clearly uncomfortable with the memory. "Exactly. He had the seats laid flat like a bed. You couldn't even see who was in the car. I was upset, freaking out after Jenny told me she was seeing him again. Exactly. You were in a daze, barely aware of your actions. But tell me, did you wipe my tool for fingerprints before you planted it? I asked quietly. Bob went pale, swallowing hard. Probably, yes. I wasn't thinking straight. I stole it from your house during a visit. I planned to scare Paul to make him stay away. I knew you kept the tool in your bedroom. I did, I said, staring into my beer. It was a gift from a client. I kept it there to protect Elaine when I wasn't home. Bob nodded, and I wondered if he grasped the irony. The tool I had left to protect Elaine had been the one that eliminated her. She told me she was going to see him again, Bob said, his voice shaking. She told me, without any remorse. Paul needs some friendly reassurance, she said. I couldn't just do nothing. I drove to where I thought they'd be. His car wasn't there, and I panicked. I called home, no answer. I jumped to conclusions. A reasonable mistake under the circumstances, I said flatly. Yes, Bob whispered. It was already raining hard when I reached the county road by the creek. I parked and walked down. On a good night, the moon would light everything up, but the weather was bad. I heard them laughing in the car. Then she moaned, and something in me snapped. I fired without thinking. I don't even remember holding the tool anymore. Bob took a deep breath, clearly shaken by the memory. I didn't know Elaine was in the car until much later. I'm so sorry, Bruce. Are you going to tell the police? He asked, his voice barely audible. I shrugged. It's not for me to judge you, Bob. I'm many things, but I'm no hypocrite. But I liquidated your wife, Bob said, as if trying to confess again. Yes, but it was an accident. Just bad luck. I don't know how the car ended up in the creek. I thought it would be found sooner, but when it wasn't, people started pointing fingers at me. Naturally, Bob said, but without the bodies or the tool, they couldn't prove anything. I put a GPS tracker in Elaine's purse, so I knew where the car was. I assumed the creek carried it off and let it sink. The evidence was always there. It was just a matter of time before they found it. I'm sorry for all of it, and I'm sorry people still think you did it. You should turn me in, Bob said, sounding resigned. I shook my head slowly. We can't control what people think, Bob, and I'm not going to replace a convenient lie with an ugly truth. You're safe from me. Then why did you invite me here? Bob asked, clearly confused. To give you this, I said, pulling a folded document from my jacket and handing it to him. What is it? He asked, eyeing the paper with suspicion. My bill, of course, I replied calmly. I've arranged one hell of a liquidation defense for you, Bob. But you defended yourself. And whose fault is that? I spent time and money. The responsible party should pay. And I must say, I did a damn good job. Bob looked at the amount on the bill. It's not too bad, he said hollowly. It was a great defense, I corrected. Bob sighed and pulled out his wallet. Do you take American Express? Of course, I said, watching him swipe his card. He looked relieved that I'd keep his secret, and I knew Bob would carry his guilt for the rest of his life. As for me, I had done what I had to do to survive. In a world where innocence is assumed guilty, I had to use my wits. After Bob left, Lottie brought me another beer. She saw the look on my face and asked, Are you okay? I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. Things are finally working out for the best. And as I sat there in the quiet bar, the weight of everything that had happened slowly began to fade. In the end, I had survived. And in this world, survival is all that matters.